Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? All right. Thank you so much for being here. I know this is such a tough time in the semester to get the students to attend. So I'm so glad you came. And for those of you who are not here and who are watching this recording, welcome as well. Happy Native and Indigenous History Month. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christina Stanchu. I'm a professor of English, not history, English here at VCU, and I have the honor of directing our Humanities Research Center. Our event today is part of our ongoing series called On Native Ground, which aims to center Indigenous lives, voices, and cultures, both locally and nationally. And we are so happy to have Laura Chilton join us today to talk about her wonderful novel, which my graduate students read and discussed this past Monday. You're in for quite a treat. I would also like to thank the School of Nursing for co-sponsoring this event and partnering with us. Our Dean of Research, Associate Dean of Research is here. Let me give a shout out to Angela Reynolds and to all the community members and colleagues who have joined us. As many of you probably know, or if you don't, that's okay. Our center, the Humanities Research Center, has been key in helping pass the recent VCU land acknowledgement, which is complicated, as many of you will probably say, but we've worked really hard for a couple of years, and it finally passed the Board of Visitors in September. And I will offer a truncated version of that, but please know that we're pushing with recommendations to the university to start a program in Native Studies, to hire faculty, and to really push this project forward, because we believe that a land acknowledgement without meaningful action is ultimately just a number of words, right? I'm also deeply aware, like many of you, of the problematic and performative nature of such an acknowledgement, but also I know as a teacher that they open up space for discussion and questions. So with that said, I'd like to welcome you today to the land of the Indigenous nations in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the federally recognized Chickahominy Eastern Division, Monacan, Nansemond, Pamunkey, Rappahannock, and the Upper Mattaponi, as well as tribes recognized by the Commonwealth of Virginia, and they include the Cherokee's Nottoway, Mattaponi, Nottoway, and Potawatomi. And Potawatomi is actually Laura Chilton's nation. Welcome all. We're incredibly honored and fortunate to welcome Laura Chilton, member, as I said, of the Potawatomi Indian Tribe of Virginia, who will read from her new book, 1666, a novel, which tells a wonderful and thrilling story of resilience and nation rebuilding by several fierce Potawatomi women in the 17th century. As I said, my students read it and discussed it this past Monday and had a lot of questions. And I know at least two of them should be here. And if they're not, we'll see about that. In the writing of this novel, as we'll learn today, Laura interviewed tribal elders, researched colonial documents, and studied the Potawatomi language. And this reading, as I mentioned earlier, is part of our ongoing lecture series on Native Ground, which aims to amplify Indigenous histories and support networks for Native communities and scholarship here at VCU. We'll open up. I think Laura will read for about 30 or 40 minutes. We'll have ample time for Q&A, for discussion. We have a wonderful table in the back, so feel welcome to go get some food and drink and come back. And also many thanks to Ronnie and Ellie, who are making all of this happen. So Laura, many thanks and welcome to VCU.
Wingapo Ok Natal, Natada Wins Hesito Nita. These words of greeting I bring to you in the Potawatomi language, a dialect of Algonquin. Hello to fellow tribe members is Wingapo, and Natab is hello friends. I like Natab because it implies friendship, even if we don't know each other. You could compare it to the English hi, that if I passed you in the street and I didn't know you, but I wanted to be friendly, I would say hello. But this is like passing you in the street and saying, hi, friend, which is an interesting cultural practice, I feel, of the Potomac, but not just the Potomac, other Indian tribes as well in Virginia, recognizing not just your existence as a human being, but as a friend. And I feel like we're friends. The warm hospitality from the Department of Humanities, but also being back on the campus of VCU after graduating from MCV nursing school back in 1979, which really does sound like the olden days now. But I have so many fond memories, and it's such a treat to be back on campus. I'm so happy to be here today for the On Native Ground initiative as we celebrate Native American Heritage Month across the United States. Kena, thank you to the VCU Humanities Department for inviting me to discuss 1666, a novel, the survival story of the Potomac Tribe of Virginia. Thank you also to the VCU MCV School of Nursing for co-hosting, and I think Chrissy is here from the School of Nursing. Thank you for coming over. I've just realized Sandra Hope is here, who will have a debut film at the festival over the weekend. So thank you for coming over to the presentation. So many people to thank. Ronnie, I love the slide. I'm so moved. It's so beautiful. And for manning the technology, it's always nice when somebody can do that because that is not my wheelhouse. And Brad's not here, but I just must say how grateful I am for the work of Brad Brown, the director of the Pocahontas Reframe Film Festival, for embracing 1666 in the early days pre-publication. So Kena, to all of you, and Kena to the ones I've named, thank you for having me today. I have learned so much about publishing and marketing in the last 2 years since I connected with Sibylline Press, the publisher of 1666, a novel. One of the things I learned is that books now have trailers. I don't know if you knew that, but it was news to me. And it's just like what you would imagine, just like in the movies, only much shorter. And so I'd like to open our time together with the trailer for 1666, a novel. Thank you, Ronnie. I would say it has been a long and winding road that has led me here this evening. From being born in Louisville, Kentucky, to my childhood years spent in Northern Virginia, to the Philippines during my teen years, back to Virginia for college right here at MCV. After that, I moved to Memphis, Tennessee, where I have lived off and on for the past 30 years. Similarly, the Potomac Tribe of Virginia has also experienced a long and winding road. Starting from their migration south from the Algonquin Nation, near what we know as the Canadian-United States border, That migration brought them to the banks of Potomac Creek before the 1300s. They lived a mostly peaceful life along Potomac Creek for many years before the European explorers arrived in full force. That life began to change and completely shattered on a horrific summer night in 1666 when all the men were killed and the women and children sold into slavery. Fast forward to the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 in Virginia, the paper genocide that further erased not just the Potomac, but attempted to erase all Native people in Virginia. Over 400 years of trying to eliminate Native people, customs, and language. But guess what? As you know, Native people and their ancestors are still here today. This resilience, this strength in the face of oppression is part of why I wrote 1666, a novel, to tell this story mostly forgotten outside of the tribe. 1666, a novel, is historical fiction, an imagined story based on written colonial records and the oral tradition of the Potomac tribe. I am an enrolled member of the tribe through the lineage of my father. I first heard the oral tradition that told of the tribe's survival in 2007. Thank you so much, Christina. I first heard the oral tradition that told of the tribe's survival in 2007 when Chief Two Eagles Green came to our Chilton family reunion. He recalled all the men being brutally killed. The women and children marched south and sold into slavery to work in the sugar fields of Barbados. From there, he told us 2 or 3 women found their way back home, ensuring the tribe would continue to exist. An act of bravery that is still stunning. There were a few men who survived that night as they were not in the village. They were working on nearby farms of early settlers. The Potomac were not the only tribe to suffer that summer. Several other tribes were attacked, but none experienced the almost complete destruction of the Potomac. From that point, though, I wanted to know more. I wanted to read that book, the book that told the story of survival, the book that described the women and their ordeal. Imagine for a minute losing your husband, your brother, your son, your father, your freedom, all gone in one night. I wondered, how do you survive something like that? I wondered how they survived in what was known as the killing sugar fields of the Caribbean. Were they motivated by revenge or love? Was it for their children or just a desire to get home? What were they feeling as they grieved these huge losses? Not just their loved ones and their village, but their freedom. I kept looking for that book. I didn't find that book, but I found bits and pieces from early explorers describing what they saw and heard as they encountered tribes in Senecomico, Virginia. I found the written records of the Governor's Council that stated their plan to, quote, make war to the utter destruction of the tribe and dispose of the women and goods. Chilling words that are shocking still today, that this council felt their actions were so right and so noble, so justifiable, that they wrote their intentions down so that we might still sit with the horror to this day. Toni Morrison, renowned writer and Nobel Prize winner in literature, has said, if there is a book you want to read, but it hasn't been written, you must be the one to write it. It wasn't exactly a light bulb moment for me when I read that, but I began to imagine the lives of the women and began to research more deeply. COVID isolation provided a couple of unexpected resources as I researched. The tribe began to offer language and culture classes via Zoom. I signed up for the children's class. Number one, I needed to start at ground zero with learning a new language that I did not know prior to that. But number two, I could see my granddaughters who lived in North Carolina every Sunday as we studied together. Also during COVID, JSTOR, which all of you academics in the room will know, opened the online digital library of academic journals, books, and primary resources, removed their paywall so folks confined at home could access articles and books. What a real gift that was. I was able to do a deep dive into life in the Barbados of the 1660s, the decadent, sugar-rich, rum-infused Little England, as it was called. A melting pot of people escaping persecution and trying to make a fortune. There was a thriving Jewish community, having already been exiled from Europe to Brazil. They now escaped to Barbados and brought along the sugar technology they had perfected. There were the Quakers, a newly formed religious group escaping persecution in England. They were in Barbados for a few years before they ultimately came to settle in what we now know of as New England. This wealthy planter class also included Anglicans. The wealth was generated by slaves from North and South America and Africa. I was intrigued by these discoveries. There was a brief opening of the COVID window, and a friend and I traveled to Barbados to continue the research. I felt compelled to feel that sun on my face, to walk in the island sand, to cut and hold a piece of sugarcane. I had learned of a mikveh, the ritual bath in the Jewish tradition that had been built in 1663. It was uncovered in the 1980s as archaeologists looked for the rabbi's house near the synagogue. When I stepped into the ancient bath with the walls of granite, marble, and cut coral, feeling the cold water on my feet and legs, I knew I would have to incorporate the mikveh into the story. All these things I wanted to experience through the eyes of my ancestors who had been brought as slaves to the island. The surviving women's names had been lost to time, but I knew I would have to use indigenous names to honor the culture and language that had been forgotten. I also wanted to honor the current work of the tribe as the language is restored. We do know some of the names from that time. I am wearing a replica of the badge of protection given to Potomac Chief Wahanganochie by King Charles II. King Charles had given 9 of the Virginia chiefs the silver badges to allow safe passage through Senecomico, Virginia in 1662. The original badge belonging to Chief Wahanganochie was found in the mid-1800s, 200 years later, in Caroline County, where he was thought to be killed, in spite of the badge of protection. The original silver badge is now on display at the Potomac Tribal Center Museum in Fredericksburg, on loan from the Smithsonian. I can trace my ancestry back to Chief Wahanganochie, who died in 1664, ambushed on his way from Williamsburg back home to the area near Fredericksburg. As a side note, 3 of the 9 badges that were gifted in 1662 have been found, and I'm still waiting for the 6 others to magically show up, buried in someone's attic or papers, probably. In 1666, a novel, the women tell their story in first person, in their own voices. Asaway Wadapa Tom, Golden Fawn, and Napawe Show, Shining Moon, tell their stories of love, heartbreak, and survival in their own voices as they are experiencing the horror of the massacre and the degradation of slavery. But they also tell of their determination to live and return home. The weaving together of historical facts, oral tradition, and language resulted in this work of historical fiction. To me, historical fiction brings the past alive and adds vibrancy to forgotten stories. And this is a forgotten story, mostly unknown outside of the tribe. I think we've all been surprised in the last few years as we have realized what we don't know. The burning of Black Wall Street in Tulsa in 1921. I didn't know about it until 2020 and the HBO series The Watchmen. The atrocities committed against the Osage in Oklahoma. Many of us just learned about this by way of the movie Killers of the Flower Moon in 2023 or read the book in 2017. These are hard stories, but we can live with them by compassionately sitting with the generational trauma, acknowledging what many Native Americans have experienced and vowing to do better. In terms of process, it took me about 3 years to write 1666 and begin querying, reaching out to agents and publishers to generate interest and find a publisher. I heard about a woman, a flight attendant, who wrote a book and sent out queries to publishers and agents. She got 47 no's, but on the 48th attempt, she got a publisher. So I told myself, don't get discouraged until you've sent it out 48 times. And after I sent it out 48 times, I said to myself, why stop now? So I continued and I connected with Sibylline Press on my 58th attempt. And I tell you that part of the story just to encourage you in whatever you were doing or dreaming of doing. Don't give up. Keep trying, keep dreaming. And if you are a student here tonight, get your degree. Get that done. Sibylline Press has been a great company to work with, and I've learned so much, not only about making a trailer, but also now there are playlists that go along with books, a task that was fun but challenging. You can listen to the 1666 playlist on Spotify, and there's a link on my website. And I also have some cards that I'll take out. I meant to take them out before I came up to the podium that have a QR code where you can access it. As you can imagine, we don't have, or as you know, we don't have recordings of music from the tribe from that time. But I used music from Indigenous artists, songs about motherhood and longing. There's a Wayne Newton song because he's a member of the tribe, and a little bit of Elvis and Memphis, just because I've been there for many years. I want to mention a little bit about the cover. So Sibylline Press has an in-house graphic designer who we all consider a genius. I was asked to create a Pinterest page with images that might be cover material or what I envisioned the cover would evoke. I knew I wanted the cover to be the face of Asue with the thin green snake in her ear. I won't reveal any spoilers for those of you who might not have read the book yet, but I can say this. In researching, I came upon diary entries describing a first encounter with the Potomac leadership. In the words of the English explorer, he said, "It appeared ye savage, had ye serpent in his ear. It appeared ye serpent was kissing ye savage." Now, we don't appreciate those words, the use of describing Native people as a savage, but I did love the imagery. And I knew I would have to find a way to use it in the book somehow. And then I found out more about the story, that when the Potomac leadership were going to negotiate trading or other business, the lead priest or negotiator would put a thin green snake through his ear piercing and loop it once. This aggravates the snake, as you can imagine, and the snake tries to wiggle around and escape. Seeing the ear canal, the snake thinks it's a cave and tries to go in. This was interpreted by visitors that the snake was whispering advice and giving an unfair advantage to the proceedings. I just loved that cultural practice from the 1600s and just wanted to honor that, its uniqueness and its specialness, and that the fact that that story has survived to this present time in the book. But this cover is Asue, and I think it captures the longing in her face and gives a nod to the tradition of a live snake in the earlobe and hints at what it might mean. I would like to read you a short passage from 1666, a novel, and then we'll take questions if there are any. To set the scene, we are hearing from Asue Wadapa'antam, Asue for short, her nickname, which means golden fawn. It is early in the book. She is just waking up after being knocked unconscious during the massacre. My head is throbbing as I open my eyes and realize from the position of the sun that it is now late morning. I'm lying down, trying to remember what has happened. My thoughts are swirling as I retrace the activities of the evening. I had been with Sho as we cared for her mom, Kesito. Then I walked to my dwelling. The night was clear, the stars bright. I got to my house and snuggled close to my sleeping husband, whispering to him that I loved him with all my heart, and fell asleep. Then what? Did I have a terrible dream? My mind is spinning when it all comes rushing back. Maman, Casito, such terror. My chest is filled with a sudden pressure that radiates to my throat, and tears pour from my eyes. My mother sits next to me, so close our bodies are touching. She holds Mana. She realizes I am waking up, remembering what has happened. My mother knows me so well. She knows how passionate I am. But now is not the time to draw attention, so she places her hand over my mouth to stifle my screams. The guttural moan that escapes me barely sounds human. As I struggle to sit up, the pain in my head makes me retch. What happened? I asked my mother. The governor's council decided to attack us since we would not accept their chief and would not sell our land, she replies stoically without moving her lips. My chest and throat fill again with longing and grief when I whisper my beloved's name, Maman. My eyes flood, as do my mother's. She saw my husband's murder too. My husband, my partner, Mana's father. The image of the gun exploding into his head will not leave me. I reach for Mana's hand, realizing she also witnessed her father's brutal death at the hand of a stranger. Maybe her eyes were closed, so the awful scene will not haunt her. She is so young. Will she remember how he loved her? I hope her eyes were closed, so the scene will not haunt her forever. My mind is jumbled with so many thoughts when I hear my mother speak. All the men are gone, she says. Gone? Where? Dead, killed by the strangers. As these words fill my ears, I fall into my mother's arms, my heart pounding as I also think of my brother, Aquimex. I whisper his name. Aquimex? My mother shakes her head. Tears now fall from her eyes. At this realization, my heart seems to stop beating and I cannot catch my breath. My brother is gone too. I have never imagined life without him. How can there be life without him? These words are too much to fathom. How can all the men be dead? I look around and see only women and children in various states of distress, crying or staring into space. I cling to Mana's hand. I will not let her go. There are many strangers riding on what they call horses, what we have always called Mangoy Tamats, big dogs. The men hold their thundersticks as they ride, intimidating us into compliance. There are more of them walking among us. They look at us with menace. Are they planning more destruction? Thank you so much for having me. 1666, a novel, is a hard book, but it is ultimately a story of resilience and survival. I applaud the work of VCU with the On Native Ground initiative. It is important to hear forgotten stories of the first encounter tribes in Virginia and reclaim the lost culture and language and honor the land that was first inhabited by Native people. Thank you. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Hi, thank you for coming today. Just curious, will you be doing an audible of your book?
Yes. Thank you for asking. A wonderful actress. Now I'm drawing a blank. No, Lanicia Daniels is currently reading it, and it will be available at the end of December. So she is of Black and Native ancestry, and we've spoken many times. It's through Tantor Media, but she's very invested in getting the pronunciation right for the words, and I'm so excited that she was chosen to read the book for audio.
I'm excited. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is not a spoiler, I hope, for those of you who haven't read the book yet. But in the prologue, you introduce us briefly to the history of the tribe, and I'm going to read a little bit from the from the prologue, and then I have a question. So you say that the written history of Virginia details the decision by the 1666 Governor's Council to declare war on the Potomac, right?
There are many ways to say it, and your way sounds very elegant.
Potomac. Potomac. Thank you. Thank you so much. Potomac, calling for, quote, their utter destruction, if possible, and that their women and children and their goods shall be taken to be disposed of, end quote. By 1669, the tribe had disappeared from the colonial record. I wonder if you can take us a little bit back into that time and talk to us about what happened from 1669 to the present. I know this is a very unfair question. And especially, you know, as a writer, what do you do when the colonial record or any record doesn't offer evidence for filling in the gaps, right? To tell the, you know, the women's story. You so beautifully do. So this is more of a historian's question for those of us who don't know much about the tribe. Thank you.
Well, that's a great question. And it's no question is too hard. I might not have the answer for all the questions, but and it's a good question because and there have been these questions have been raised in the public domain. How can there be a tribe today when there was no mention since 1669? But you would have to imagine that that government that chose to kill the tribe, and the Potomac were one tribe that had never signed, they might be the only tribe that did not sign any treaties to give away their land. So the government at the time would have a vested interest in being sure they were all dead and gone. So my book follows the women till 1672 when they get back. And it would have had to be in that time frame for them to get back and still be of reproducing age, if you will. And they lived underground at that point because it wasn't safe. As much as we know about, say, the story of Pocahontas and her child with her native husband before she married the Englishman, that child was taken into hiding. And we didn't hear about him for the longest of time, except for in native communities. But the wider history that is told in Virginia, no one knows that Pocahontas had a child before she had her son with John Rolfe. So the tribe was very much underground. They knew who they were, and the other Virginia tribes knew too. There's evidence that the tribes had to come together. So as I said, they weren't the only tribe in that summer of 1666 to suffer massacres and killing. So the other tribes, everybody had to kind of come together in the northern part of the Powhatan Nation to stay alive. And so from there, what we know historically, and the Potomac were mentioned many times leading up to 1669, they were a well-known tribe. That's when oral tradition picks up. And oral tradition is a very vibrant way of telling history. It's been around for ages before there was written language. Many, many cultures have used oral tradition to tell their story. And so that's where we get this story, that combination of the written records up to that point. You know, the adventurers and settlers and colonists wrote about the Potomac. William Strachey recorded the language, wrote the language down. So we have all that. But then when they were killed and tried to be eliminated, then that's where oral tradition takes up. Does that answer your question? I saw it.
Thank you. So picking up on that, are there any existent recordings of these oral stories, such as the Library of Congress has for freed slave stories and so on. Do you know of any of those stories that are actually preserved in audio format?
I don't know. I would imagine that because in many ways it's been in this category of forgotten story, that maybe now they will start to be recorded by some historians. I do actually, as I'm saying that, I'm realizing that the tribe is making an effort at doing some recordings, just that they have at the tribal center, to capture some of this oral tradition and this history.
Thank you. Can you speak to some of the serendipities or particular struggles that you had while writing the book?
Well, I think no one would have anticipated that COVID could have had like a blessing, because there was so much awfulness that came of that, so much death and destruction. And but it did provide a time for me to sit with this and to begin to put it on paper and to, do the deep dive. It was hard to put it on paper, and I wanted many times to tie it in a bow, like a big old pink bow, and they got over there, and then their master was so nice and got them a first class ticket, and they flew home and everything was peachy keen. But it couldn't be that way. So I did struggle with, how to be authentic with what it would have been like for the women there. And as they'd been separated, as they had to learn a new language, as they not embraced, but also learned all these new cultures, not just from their fellow slaves who had come from Africa, but from the English settlers there who were, really driven by making a fortune, most of them trying to, better their own situation. But then also the overlap of the decadence that was there and the wealth that was there. It was an unusual place at that time. So, and then, serendipity, suddenly COVID window open, and I asked a friend, do you want to go to Barbados? Would you be willing? Barbados had just opened up. And so we went there, and then it closed back up again, like a couple of weeks later. But even that, there was some interesting, I called a travel agent to say, we want to go to Barbados. I would like to go to the Jewish synagogue. I want to find the slave marker. These are the various things I want to see. I need to go to a plantation. And she said, I'll call you back tomorrow. And she called me back and she said, I am so sorry. I can't help you. I've only looked for beaches and clubs and food in Barbados. So I have no idea. And she suggested just get there and then ask at the hotel if there's somebody who they would possibly recommend. And so we found a fella who was willing to sort of hang with us for the week or 5 days. And I told him that first day, here's what I'm looking for. And he said, I have never seen the slave marker. I do not know where the synagogue is. He was like, I don't think we have that. So then I was like going through my notes. I was like, I think it's at the corner of 5th and Market Street. And so we drove and there it was. And so then he was intrigued about what he was seeing. And so he said, I'm going to go after the first day together. He said, I'm going to ask my friends tonight about this to find out why I don't know this. And the next day he said, here's what my friend said. We don't like to talk about this in Barbados. We want to do tourism, happy good times. We don't want to embrace what happened here as a part of the slave culture. And he said, we're afraid we would become an angry country and we wouldn't want tourists to come. So it was interesting, like learning, sort of those kind of unexpected things.
So I understand that last year there was a legislative initiative introduced for Potawatomi federal recognition.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if any one of the congresswomen who introduced the legislation talked to you about the oral history that you uncovered
Well, I guess it was Congresswoman or Spanberger, and she had already is closely in touch with tribal leadership and the tribal council and the historian. So she and I have never actually met. I do know she was given a copy of the book, but she and I haven't talked about it. But the tribe is really grateful that she took the lead on that.
I was very intrigued that you have a nursing degree, and we have a couple of people from the nursing school here. And there's so much to love about this book, and the fellowship of the women that and their resilience in these horrendous circumstances. And I love the flashbacks and the flash forwards, but most of the flashbacks when they go back to their home. And you write about the blood house, menstruation and traditional ways of talking and honoring that in contrast with life, as an enslaved woman in Barbados. So I guess my question is, without rambling too much, how much of your training as a nurse has inspired how you wrote about human suffering and the human condition in this book?
It's almost like you're a plant in the audience.
I was
And
not.
we did not talk about this in advance, but one of the things I did want to bring up is that things that I'm fascinated with as I write are number one, the intersection of faith, religious practice, and culture. But I'm also fascinated by medicine and nursing and the role of women in healing. And while I was one of the statistics at nursing school, who we all said to ourselves, we won't be that statistic of nurses who work in the clinical setting for like 3 years before they go on to something else. I can say that my nursing education has colored and enriched every aspect of my life since I graduated from nursing school in 1979. And you can see in 1666, I think, my interest in Native medical practice and also just the role of women with childbirth. And I also do love the cultural practice for both girls and boys as they cross that threshold to adulthood, and the idea of the blood house where they go for isolation, the Meski Hakan, and then the boys have their Huskanau. So when they go away for up to 6 months to become transition into men, and then they come back with great celebration. But the women, how on a girl's first blood, goes into the Meski Hakan with the other women. And there they practice their traditional arts of tattooing and just have time to rest and recuperate from life. And it's just it's a practice that is intriguing to me. And although I don't think there's a way in our modern times we could probably do it, and just with the life we live, there's something that's very attractive about that possibility, especially when you think about young girls having time that's set aside with older women to learn how to get through life, if you will.
I have two questions, actually. First of all, you said you traced your ancestry back to the chief.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered how easy that was, whether the tribe actually keeps good records for that. And also, when you were in Barbados, did you actually find evidence of the fact that women from Virginia or from this particular tribe actually arrived on a ship there?
So that I was looking for that. So I'll answer the second question first. So I was that was one of the things I wanted to do. But there was only one plantation that basically was used as a tourist, destination where you could go and look at old records. And sadly, but not surprisingly, everybody was just identified with a number. And so it was hard to tell, but I couldn't identify if these were from Virginia. But it was well known and well documented that slaves had come from South and North America all over the Caribbean, not just to Barbados to work in the killing sugar fields, which, we think of that term as like a modern term having to do with the killing fields of Cambodia. That term was first coined with the sugar fields because it was just a constant supply of labor because it was so brutal and the workers just died so rapidly. So I didn't get to trace it like I'd wanted to. And the records, I don't even think there was record. They haven't preserved the records, the Barbados government. If you ever have a chance to go, though, be sure to go to the Jewish museum there. Has preserved so much about trade and life in that time. And that museum was just incredible. And the graveyard there was just amazing. In terms of tracing my ancestry back to Wahanganochi, I was very lucky because that my ancestors had already traced it. So it's through my father's family that I'm a member of the tribe. And some of the, like my father's, how was this? A family member had already had gone through meticulously and traced it all back. And so that's how we could go back as far, and it goes back further than that, but it goes to Wahanganochi. And so I guess I could also add that I didn't find out about my father's ancestry and thus my ancestry until I was in my late 40s. My father never told us. And when he did tell me, I have 3 siblings. I had gone to visit them. I lived in Memphis. I'd gone to visit my mom and dad. And we were having dinner, and he just very casually, like as he passed the potatoes, said, and my grandmother, who was an Indian, here's the potatoes. And I was just like, Dad, wait, I promise you have never mentioned this before. And I was like, I even remember being in 4th grade and asking you about our heritage. And you said we were mostly Scottish and English. And he said, yeah, it was a secret. And it was just, flabbergasted to find this out. But for context, he was born in 1935. The Racial Integrity Act was passed in 1924. And he remembered being told by his parents, when you go to school on the first day of school, when he was 6, if your teacher asks you if you're an Indian, you have to say no. And then if you get called to the principal's office and they ask you if you're Indian, you have to say no. And so he carried with him this secret. And I think what was attached to it was like a legal concern about the ramifications. He would get kicked out of school. As a 6-year-old, he's not understanding what it might mean to pass, but he's understanding the ramifications of getting kicked out of school and then what could happen to his family with land ownership or being able to vote. And so he carried that. And then somebody asked me, well, why did he finally tell? And I think he finally felt safe. He was 70, maybe. And I think he felt safe to tell that part of his story. And what was also just so lovely and so amazing is that once he started talking about it, he couldn't stop talking about it. And then on that night at dinner, he was like, yeah, and I'm already a member of the tribe. So he just, and then we could look back and also put 2 and 2 together. Like his grandmother had lived with them and things he had told us about her. Like he talked about, he never said she did this because this was her native culture or her Indian culture, but he said, my grandmother always made corn cakes and she didn't use a spatula. She used her hands on the cast iron griddle or the cast iron pan. And he would make those for us using a spatula, but all the siblings can remember him talking about his grandmother making that food but never connecting it to a piece of his culture. But after that, we started to be, Daddy, what about this? What about that? And he was like, yeah, they went. So, yeah, the implications from the Racial Integrity Act, I think we're still feeling that in Virginia. And as to the question of tribal recognition federally, any little bit of paper trail, or a lot of the paper trail that was left for tribes to prove their existence were destroyed with that act. So it's difficult.